Welcome back. In the last video, we set up our tools, and in this video, we're going to talk about HTML. Those are 4 letters, and it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is the language of the web. HTML allows you to define your web document. You can think of how you have Microsoft Word documents. Every web page is a web document, kind of similar to a Word document, but it has the capability to be much more rich. You can embed videos, and I think you can actually do that in Microsoft Word now too. It's just less common. But you can embed videos, you can have interactions, you can have animations, all sorts of things. Web documents can be extremely rich, and HTML is the fundamental building block to put that in place. Over the course of this project, we'll also talk about JavaScript and CSS. The reason I bring those up now is it's important to know that there are 3 pieces to this puzzle, and each piece does something different. HTML defines your content, the content of your document. CSS makes your document look pretty, or not pretty if you choose to make it look that way. And JavaScript is what makes your document interactive. So we're going to start with HTML, and then we'll get to CSS, and then we'll get to JavaScript. And then we'll deploy this so you have it available. We'll talk about a couple different tools that you have at your disposal. Okay, we'll hit the New File button up here, and we're going to create index.html. You can call this whatever you want, but index.html has a very specific purpose. The index means that this will render on /. So if you were to go to facebook.com, this is a bit of a reductionist example because it's not this simple for Facebook. But if you were to go to facebook.com // you would get the index.html. If we had another page called profile.html and you went to facebook.com /profile, you would get the profile page. So index basically means don't add anything else onto what we call the path. So the path is the URL that you are accessing. So facebook.com /profile. That's a URL. That's also the path that you're accessing. Okay, I'm going to delete the profile HTML file. That way we don't get confused. We're going to be working strictly in the index HTML file. So we can start by adding 2 tags. This is the HTML tag. This indicates that we are working with HTML, and it represents the root of the HTML document. One moment to talk about VS Code. One of the nice things about VS Code, this editor, is that it's built for web development and a couple other things, but web development is one of the key selling points. So you can do things like hover over a markup tag. This is called a tag, and it will tell you exactly what it does. You see here it also calls it an element. These are kind of the same thing. In the browser, they're called elements because they're elements of the document. But when we're writing them here, we commonly refer to them as tags. So all of your HTML documents will start with an HTML tag. We will add a body, and body's a little weird. So let's add one more. We'll call it head. There are 2 key children. These are called children because they're in the HTML tag. So this tag has 2 children. It has a head and a body. If we were to add another tag here, like an H1, it would be a child of body or a grandchild of HTML. That's a way to refer to those. And really what you're building here is a markup tree. So this ends up taking the shape of a tree, not visually the shape of a tree, but a structure for code called a tree. And as you start working your tree, you'll move farther from left to right. It's just a way that indentation works and how we write things. So these 2 children are important. Head is information about your document, but it doesn't actually show anything on the screen. So you can see here it represents a collection of metadata for the document. This would be things like your tab title. So when a user navigates to your web page in a browser, they're navigating in a tab most likely, and that tab needs a title. You can specify the title here. The body is what is actually rendered in the content of the document. So let's take a look at a web page really quick. So we're back on the Visual Studio Code documentation. You can see here documentation for Visual Studio Code. That's the title. that belongs in the head. And in fact, we'll show you how to take a look at other websites' HTML too, because that's all publicly available. There's also a favicon. This is a little icon that is used to indicate what tab you're working with. So in our case, we have the Visual Studio Code logo here. Here's another one. This is GitHub. Here's another one. This is Stack Overflow. Here's another one. This is the MDN documentation. Okay, everything under my bookmarks bar here belongs in the body. So all of this is code that's in the body. Anything that's not in the body would be in the head. So if you have something you want to put in your document, but you don't want it to be visible, there's a couple exceptions there, and we'll get to those. It would be metadata, right? So you would have information like how Facebook should render this whenever someone shares it. That would go in the head. The title would go in the head. The favicon would go in the head. If that's confusing, for now, just know that the title goes in the head. That's the most common use case, but there are more, and you'll get to those when you need them. Okay, now that we're in this browser, I want to show you how you can look at HTML. There are two options. Let's say we really like how this web page works. We want to know more about the way it's structured. So we can right-click on this web page, and we can hit Inspect, and this opens up a development tool. The very first thing I want to tell you is how to close this. You can click on the X here to get out of it. If you want to open it again, right-click, Inspect. This is an HTML editor. There are a lot of tools over here. Don't worry about these tools right now. They're tools to help you, the developer, figure out issues and debug other scenarios whenever you are building a web page. For now, the only thing we really care about is the content. So you can see here, they have that HTML tag. They have a lang equal to English. This is an attribute. And then they have a head. And you can see they have a title here, documentation for Visual Studio Code, just like I mentioned. They have a link to some style sheets. This is CSS. So this is how they style this page so it looks nice and pretty. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment, because we will write some code and we'll take a look at our web page and it won't be nice and pretty. They have some Twitter-specific metadata. They have some Facebook-specific metadata for how they should render in the feed when this page is shared. Okay. In the body, you can see a couple different things. They have an attribute called class OSX. This is based on my browser. So yours might say Windows or Win or something similar, or Linux. A class is another attribute. Classes allow us to target certain documents with styles or with JavaScript. I think I said certain documents. I mean certain elements with styles or JavaScript. Then we have some content underneath of it. We have, for example, a div, another div, another div, another div. Divs are pretty common, but we have semantic HTML that is a little bit more meaningful than divs. They don't really mean much. You can think of them as a division of the web page. Then we have a footer. So we can scroll down here and we can see that footer. One of the nice things here is if you hover over any of these these elements, I keep saying documents, it will show you on the page what that item is. So notice how it highlights it on the actual browser web page as well. And then the last thing I want to show you, because this is kind of cool, once you have one of these selected, you can see the stuff in this debug section over here, our tools, is changing. So I'm going to click on the footer, and I'm going to just do a hypothetical and say, well, what if this footer wasn't black, but it was red? So we have a couple options. You can click on this button, and you can make it red. You can see that this value changes. You can also tinker around with these values. This is called a hex code. We won't get into those now. We might when we get into CSS. But you can tinker around with the value as well and see what you enjoy. One thing to keep in mind is anything you make, any changes you make here will not persist. So if I refresh the page and we go look at this footer again, hey, look, it's black once more. If you want to persist those things, you would have to add it to your document. You don't have access to this actual document, right? This is just what your browser is rendering, the elements, but you don't have access to the source document. So you can't make those changes. However, you can make the changes in your own document. So let's follow their lead here. And we're going to use, let's see. I believe they had an H1 tag right here. There we go. It's an H1. So in H1, there are 6 types of headings in HTML. There's H1, there's H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. These elements have a lot of impact. These are the things, the high-level headings that your document is about. So I'm going to type my personal web page. I should mention one thing. I've been typing for longer than I have been developing. I make typos, but I'm still a fairly fast typist. If I type too fast, pause the video, catch up, and then unpause. You can also look at slowing the video down using the YouTube settings in the bottom right corner of the video, and do whatever you need to make sure that you can keep up. Okay, one thing that's important, we can see here that there's a little white dot. This white dot means that this file is not saved. You have a couple options. You can click File and then Save, but you can also see here Command S is the hotkey for that. We are going to use hotkeys as much as we can. Clicking can be slow, and we like to move fast. On Windows, instead of Command S, that's Control S, and I think on Linux it's Control S as well. Okay. Oh, sorry, this is my personal web. Let's make it say personal web page. And then let's add a paragraph. My name is Brad. Okay, so we've added a couple children to the body. We've added an H1. This is the heading. So if you were writing like a research paper, your key points would be headings, right? You would break things down into sections. Those sections would have headings. That's what an H1, an H2, an H3, an H4, an H5, and an H6 is used for. It's important to know you can have multiple headings of the same type. You can have multiple H1s, you can have multiple H2s. You don't necessarily have to say, oh, I used an H1 last, so I need to use an H2 now. Or, oh, I used an H3 last, so the next one's an H4. In fact, that's not as common as you would expect. So if you have a key heading like, for example, here's an example. We have an H2. I live in the United States. I have another heading. So maybe I'll say something, I'll add like a paragraph here. The United States is neat. I'll add a heading here that says, I live in Indiana. Notice this is an H3 and not an H2. Notice this is an H2 and not an H1. You can kind of think of it like this. This is an outline. The H1, this is the top level heading. This is what the web page is about. And it's my personal web page. It's about me. The H2 is what this next section is about. I live in the United States. Okay, so it's me living in the United States. I have a paragraph of text about that, me saying the United States is neat. And then I have an H3. An H3 is a heading, but you can think of it as a subheading to H2. You can also think of an H2 as a subheading to H1. You can have multiple H3s. I used to live in San Francisco. H3. Before that, Missouri. This is totally fine. I'm going to remove all of this except for the H1 and the P. So I highlighted it and then pressed backspace. I've saved my web page. Now I'm going to go to Finder. I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to click on Web Project, and I see index.html. You can also see that Firefox already is selected for this for me because Firefox is my default browser. Yours might be Edge, it might be Chrome. It doesn't make a difference as long as you have a web browser. Double click it, and it will open your web page. We have some HTML with the top level heading and a paragraph. This is pretty good. So you might want to add some things about yourself to your personal web page. I'll caveat this with one thing. The end of this project will have us deploying this on the web, and it will be publicly available. If it's not something that you're willing to put out on the internet, don't put it in your web page. Fair enough? Don't put your home address, your mother's maiden name, your last 4 of your social, your credit card. Don't put any of that. It's okay to have an internet presence. I do this. I'm actually fairly open with mine. I have my own blog. I also have this YouTube channel that you're watching. And I'm fairly open about who I am on the internet. That is totally fine, but it's something that you should make a conscious decision about and not accidentally expose information about where you live, which I won't tell people, or other things like that on your personal web page. Okay, I'm going to go back to my blog for a second. This is content, but this is styled content. The stuff we have on this web page now is just content. There's no styles to it. We will style it using cascading style sheets, CSS, soon. So if this looks weird and you're like, this is a waste of time, hang in there with me. We'll make something look a little better. It did take me a long time to get my blog to look like this, so we probably won't make it as nice as this or as nice as the Visual Studio Code website, but we will style this a little bit, and I'll give you the tools to style it however you want. Okay. Before our next video, I have one thing to ask of you. Go ahead and fill out this document. There's a lot of different options here, but these are the tools you need to kind of add some content to your page. So you might add another H2 because it'd be a subheading for my personal web page. I have, you know what, let's say dogs. I have 2 dogs, Luna and Shrimp. Okay, this is kind of the idea. Add some subheadings, add some paragraphs. Go ahead and make the page your own. Make sure you save it. And if we go back to our browser, it didn't update. The reason why is that we don't have tooling in place to automatically update this for us. All we have to do is refresh. There's a refresh button in the top left of your browser. You can also use the hotkey Command R on Mac, and I believe it's Control R on Windows.